Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us again in the afternoon. As you can see, Don Norman joins us from the States at 7 a.m. In the morning on his side. So thank you so much for making the time. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. The one thing that I do want to say is, as you can see, the one thing that I do want to say is, I'm going to share my video for a few minutes, and I'm hoping that that gives the audience the time to ask the questions that they've been burning to ask. So let me just share my screen for a minute or two. And this is something from a few attendees to you, Don.
When you enter the world of UX, the first name you hear is Don Norman.
Don Norman broke my brain in a good way.
Hi Donald, I've always been frustrated with processes and systems.
The first book that is recommended to you is The Design of Everyday Things. I mean, this is the man at the very center of user-centered design.
Hi there, my name is Ashni and I'm a usability analyst.
My name is Storm Morrisby and I'm a user interface and experience designer from the Immersion Group.
Hi Don, this is Kim from sunny South Africa. I'm a UX researcher in the fintech space.
Hi, I'm Shanae from Immersion Group. I started out in print layout design and editorial design and came across Don and his book. And I knew from then on that that's what I wanted to do. So focused on that and followed his career absolutely any way possible. So thank you, Don, for your contribution to the industry and everything you've offered us.
And you actually gave me the tools to do something about it. And I would be forever in your debt without you even knowing about it. You gave me a wonderful career. And I would just like to thank you for that. Thank you very, very much.
But if I had to pick one thing that has changed the way that I think and changed the way that I work, it's got to be that you have to make sure that you are solving the right problem. Because your solution can be so amazing, but if you're solving the wrong problem, it's kind of useless.
The very first two books that I read in the experience design field was The Design of Everyday Things and Emotional Design. So ever since then, a door handle has never looked the same again. And I've always scrutinized my kitchen appliances from a usability point of view before purchasing them. And apart from that, I've always looked to the Nielsen Norman Group as a point of reference whenever we were designing our design system or having a look at our team's roles and responsibilities. And let's not forget that famous question of why do you research with 5 individuals from your target market?
I started my career as a front-end developer and I was working at a human-centered design agency. While I was there, I started learning more and more about UX, and that broke my brain for interfaces. I couldn't help but see lots of things that I wanted to try and help fix. At some point, a friend recommended I read The Design of Everyday Things. That broke my brain for the world. I couldn't help but look around and see lots of things that I wanted to try and help fix. These days, I see the world in a slightly different light. I can't help but see things that I want to try and help improve or make a little bit better.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for everything that you've done in this community. We really appreciate and value you. Cheers.
So thank you, Don Norman, for breaking my brain in a good way.
So I'm really looking forward to meeting you, Mr. Don Norman, at the UXSA conference. See you.
John Norman's great work has had a huge impact on the work I do as a designer, and was also one of the reasons why I decided to make this exciting line of work my career. John Norman, if you're listening to this, I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for the great contribution you've made towards human-centered design. This allows us to create experiences that excite and delight, so thank you.
So that's the video. Artie, thanks from our community, and let's get into the questions.
That was a very lovely video, so very touching. So thank you all. Yes, I was listening and attending. Thank you.
Awesome. I mean, I'll send the video with you so that you have it as well. But so let's jump into it. So guys, remember, we're going to need your participation and engagement. Please add your questions to the Ask a Question component. First question, Don. Companies are asking more and more for, actually wait, let me do this. Amanda, I'm going to invite you on screen and I'm going to ask you to ask your question. So I'm just sending Amanda an invitation to join us on screen. Then if Amanda wants to accept. Okay, doesn't look like it.
Well, I can read
the question. Okay.
Companies are asking more and more for designers who can do everything. UX, hi, Amanda. So you.
Hi, Don.
Okay. So ask your question.
Oh, okay. I first want to say thank you so much. I first read your book, Design for Everyday Things, before I became a UX designer, and it got me really interested in the whole field, and I never looked at door handles the same way again. So thank you. Okay, so the question is, companies are asking more and more for designers who can do everything, UX, UI, and research. Do you think that this is a good way forward, or should we still specialize? Thank you.
The answer to many of these questions is going to be, it all depends. But one of the problems is that companies don't understand design in general and UX design. And they say, well, you know, okay, I guess you convinced me we need a designer, so we'll hire one. We need somebody who is up to date on all the recent things, can do wireframes, can do the basic designs, can do the design research to figure out what we need, and of course can program it. And that's just, and also 20 years of experience. And that's all crazy, okay? So that I sympathize with the companies, especially small companies that don't have much of a budget. They don't want to hire 5 people to do 5 different tasks. But on the other hand, some of these skills are not compatible with one another. So the programmer, that's a very special skill. And to make code that's reliable and robust and can work for large numbers of people and is easy to modify for other people to understand and change, that's a special skill. And very few UX designers have that skill. And the other thing is the design research, where you're going out to, say, to look at people and watch them and interview them and see what they're actually doing in their job, is another kind of specialized research. And then the actual putting together, designing the structure that people will actually use and interact with, and then interacting with the programming team to ensure that they actually do something that's what you asked for. And when they can't, because there are technical difficulties, two of you work it out together. That's a different skill. Now, that in some sense, that should require 3 different kinds of people. And in the larger teams and companies that understand this process, there are different people that do these tasks. The two that usually can be combined is design research and the development of the design itself that is then passed on to the programming team, the engineers. Because design research is often taught in whatever classes you take, usually has a design research component. And it's in my book as well, not in great detail, but enough that you begin to understand what is required. So ideally, they're separate groups, but in reality, people very seldom can they afford many people. And so you may have to be the jack of all trades and do everything yourself. But if you can do a good job and you can demonstrate that you've done really something that improves the product and maybe improves sales and profits, that allows you to say, we need somebody else.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Don. And thank you, Amanda. I'm going to invite George to the screen now. So guys, as we ask the questions, and as you can see, the questions are being upvoted. I'll just invite you to the screen to ask your question. I see George is accepted and he's in the process of joining us. It takes a few seconds for someone to join on screen for some reason. I'm not sure if it's a latency issue or what.
Mike, help if you could invite two people, a person and the next one afterwards. So that might speed up the process.
Okay, then I'll do that. Happy to do that.
Hi, George.
Hi, Don. Thank you so much for coming to South Africa virtually. It's been a pleasure meeting you, and thank you so much for your book and your inspirations. Our company uses a lot of your research to guide our design processes. So my question to you is, I heard that you're going to be retiring soon, and what changes you like to see in the UX world in your lifetime still?
I'm actually a complete failure at retirement because I've already retired 4 times, and I'm just trying to retire the 5th time, which looks like it may happen. So I've told people that I want to retire by December 31st of this year because that's the week that I become 85 years old. It seems like, yeah, but when I retire, I'm not going to stop working. I'm actually have a big project to try to change the way we do design education. Because I think that mostly design education has not kept up with the 21st century, which is a start of an answer to what you are saying. First of all, mostly design is taught as a craft, and design is more than that. Design is answering the correct question, finding the correct question, making sure you're answering the real underlying issues, and it's a way of thinking. It's a way that can be applied to anything, to the organization of your company, to solving major societal issues. And look, there's a famous book by a designer in 1971 who wrote a book called Design for the Real World, Victor Papanek. And the very first sentence in this book was, there is no field more dangerous than design, more evil than design. Why? Because designers make all this crap that we have to buy every year and throw away, and we destroy the environment in mining the environment to make cell phones that are so small. If the cell phone didn't have to be quite so thin, it would be easier to make and less harmful to the environment. You wouldn't have to get exotic materials, and then you can't fix it because it's got to be so small, you can't take it apart easily and change things. So, but he's wrong. He's correct about the evil. And by the way, if you're a digital designer, it's the same thing. We now call it the surveillance society, where actually what we do, we addict people so they watch whatever the advertiser wants you to watch. And that also is really bad. It causes, well, in the United States, we call it fake news, lies that become very popular and people watch. And why do designers do this? Well, because designers don't have power. So one of the things that I believe is very important for UX in the future is that you have a move up in the company so that you are in a position of authority. because designers in general are in the middle levels of companies. And in the university, design is also not a well-respected subject. Why? Because design doesn't have a solid academic base, which is what universities respect. And so one thing we have to do is have more in-depth research, which is what will form the basis of what people study when they become designers. And that will also increase the respect of design in the university. But in companies, how come we have very few companies who have chief design officers who talk to the head, the whatever you call your general manager or the chief executive officer? So they are making the decision. Right now, designers are told what to build, and you either build it or you don't have a job. It should be the designers who decide what the company should be making. And designers who say, look, for the sake of the company, for the sake of the environment, here's what we should be doing. We should be using different materials. We should be doing things that are reusable, or making products that can be upgraded, that don't have to be replaced and thrown away. But you can't do that today unless you are basically the boss on top, up where the decisions are made. Now, in order to do that, you have to understand business. So many designers don't understand that. I ask you, George, who do you work for?
I work for Takealot, which is an e-commerce company in South Africa.
Okay, so when you do your work, who is your customer?
The population of South Africa, in this case.
Right. That was a trick question because that is the wrong answer. That's the customer of the company. And that's who the products that you're going to be designing are being used for. But suppose, do you think that your company really understands the value you bring to them? No, not really.
Not yet.
So the question is, how do you convince the people you work for what you do? And most people say, I won't ask you, most of the designers I talk to say, we show them the wonderful work we do. We show them the prizes we won. We show them the net presenter score. And we show them everything. And I say, useless. Or we tell them the problems that people are having with our products. And I say, useless. I used to be an executive. And let me tell you, executives don't want to hear the problems. It's not that they don't want to be deceived, but they want to hear the solutions, not the problems. Second, they don't want to hear how good you are, because the response is this: of course you're good. That's why we hired you. If you want to convince them, you have to say, you know, I have an idea for how we can do things better. And what you have to show them is not a picture, not a prototype, but a spreadsheet. Because when I said, who is your customer? Your customer is your boss, or actually better, the boss of your boss.
The CEO.
And how does that person get rewarded? That person is rewarded by increased profits and decreased costs, or also what we call margin, which is sort of the difference. And so you have to learn the language of your customer, and your customer is the people you work for. And they are rewarded in business for making a successful business, because if the business isn't successful, it doesn't exist anymore. So you have to learn the language of business. Not everybody, but enough people, at least one person in every UX group. And that's how you make the sales. And then you'll say, but how can I show them a spreadsheet and show them how much money we're going to make? How do I know those numbers? Well, marketing does it all the time. That's why marketing tells you what you should be doing. And how does marketing do it? They make up the numbers. So you can make it up just as well as they can. Well, maybe not, because you have to make up the numbers, because management knows that you made up the numbers. You're not fooling them. So what they do is they look at it and they say, does this make sense? You have to have a logical reason why those numbers seem very reasonable. That's what marketing does. That's what your management used to do themselves when they were lower in the ranks. So it's the only way to do it. But the point is, you have to learn management to be a better UX designer. So there's your answer.
Thank you so much, Don.
Thank you for that, Don. Thank you, George. So the next person to ask the question would be Ignatius. I think is minimized and on mute as well. Ignatius?
Yes. Hello, Iggy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
And see me, Africa. Hello, John. How are you? So I have a question about how do you inspire UX designers or teams to come up with the best possible solution to a design challenge? And now I'm referring to when you actually start wireframing. So you've done your research and all of that. Now, how do you inspire like junior UX designers and to create wireframes that actually can solve a problem?
Actually, of all the issues that we face, that seems like the easiest one. In fact, I don't think I've ever had a problem. So I'm trying to understand why where you work, people need to be inspired. Where I work, and in the places, many different companies that I've given advice to, that's what the design team is excited by the possibility of doing something that really works for people. Now, by the way, we don't try to do the very best. There's a famous saying, which is that the very best is the enemy of the good, because you don't need something that is perfect. In fact, trying to get something that is perfect and the very best is a bad idea, because that means you have to spend a lot more time and a lot more effort, usually tuning it in ways that most people would never notice. And usually a company is very concerned about time and money, and time and money are the same, basically, because the more time you take, the more salaries money is being spent. And also maybe market opportunities are being lost. And so I've always argued that what you need is good enough. And the way you discover that is that you're testing all the time. You're always bringing in people that the same kind of people you hope will use your product, and discover if they can use it or if they enjoy it. But in inspiration, gee, if people aren't inspired, they're in the wrong job, or maybe the wrong company.
Can I actually went because at Sand, I work for a company called $10 Design. So in 2019 and 2020, we started the internship and graduate program. So then all these graduates and interns, they do a great job at doing the actual research. But then when we actually ask them, okay, cool, now it's time to start the wireframing, can you actually come up with a solution and look back at your journey maps that you've developed, and you've looked at all the tasks, you've looked at new user visiting versus the existing user, how are you going to now actually come up with a solution? Because a lot of, like, for instance, if you look at making a booking, say for Airbnb or something like that, so then I will ask them, show me how would you make a booking, and then they will actually just show me 2 screens, which is a landing screen, and then the next screen is a screen with a button at the bottom that says make a booking. But they don't actually go further to say, okay, cool, now I'm here, it's step 1, now I must actually divulge some of my information and then actually book the date that I want to be at. And then there's a success message that says, okay, your booking is awarded, or an unsuccessful one.
So here, this is the first question I was asked, was when the company says, we need somebody who can do the design basic research, who can do the wireframe, who can do the design, who can do the programming, etc. One person do it all. The kinds of people that you hire to do design research are not capable often of doing great interaction design and thinking about the user experience and how best to implement that. They're different skills. It's not their fault. They're different skills. They could be the world's best design researcher. Doesn't mean they're a great interaction designer, and vice versa. Great interaction designers may not be the ones who go out and understand what the customers really need. And so I think that's the problem. Maybe that you're asking people to do things they're not good at, and they don't have a way unless you retrain them to say, look, let's think about the entire experience and what it is you're really trying to accomplish at the end, And as a design researcher, you know that people don't do it in a straightforward way. They go back and forth, they change their minds, they get confused, or they're asked to fill in information they don't know yet, so you have to have a way of letting them proceed anyway. So the skills of design researcher gives you the knowledge that you need, but not necessarily the skills to design great screens. So I think that may be the underlying problem. You're asking people to do things they're not good at.
Okay. And
Thank
how
you.
would
Oh, what happened there?
Hi,
Oh, no,
Don.
Let me just answer what I think was the question. How would I change things? Well, I would do, I think I could, in a matter of a week or less, a number of hours, various explorations and projects, train people to be much better at designing the flow, which is what you're concerned about, the flow of activities. But now let's turn to Nicola.
Hi, John. Sorry, I'm not sure what happened there. I accepted an invite, and it seems I jumped in a bit early. It's great to meet you. You've, like a lot of us, you've been a huge inspiration, and you're a big part of the reason why I do what I do. So it's very exciting to be here with you. So my question for you, you've touched on it a little bit, I think talking about design potentially being a force for evil and also changing how we educate designers. But I wanted to know, looking to the future, what do you think we should be thinking about and learning about now that will help us evolve our field and, you know, continue to do ethical and inclusive design that's relevant and, you know, at least tries to make the world a better place in the coming decades?
That's actually, I've assembled a team of approximately 600 people from around the world to try to answer that question. And we're just beginning. We're about a year in, and I think it's about a 3-year project. So I have a steering committee of 16 very senior designers, some of them deans and department chairs in universities, and some of them senior executives in industry, to try to guide this process. But let me think. Here's a problem with design as it stands today. We're very dictatorial, and you have been dictated to by Europe and the United States. And we've dictated about the way to do design properly, and here's the way it is. And it isn't necessarily what is needed in your country, in South Africa or in India or in the northern part of Africa, where the countries and the cultures are very, very different than in Europe. So why does what works in Kenya, why is Kenya use the very same principles that France or England does, or the United States? And South Africa is also a very varied country with many different kinds of cultures and different requirements in the different parts in the different cities. And the people in India are very different as well. So one thing we'd like to do is, it's a new movement that's called decolonization. Instead of the Europeans coming in and telling you, this is how it should be done. No, you should do what is appropriate for where it is you live. And I would love to see more variety that comes about in the world. You know, years ago when I used to travel around the world, I would always want to go and stop at the local restaurants and have the wonderful local food. And I wanted to see the local stores. I loved hardware stores because the way people did things, the way they constructed and built things, or for that matter, the way they cooked and gardened, was so different in different parts of the world, and it was fascinating. I don't do that anymore. Back in the days when I still traveled, just a couple of years ago. Why? Because they all look the same. Everybody uses the same machines, the same devices, the same cooking, the same gardening equipment, still is slightly different. But mostly it's all the same. And that's a shame, because there was excitement and interest in the way that different people did things, and they did it for appropriate reasons. But we now have what's called a monoculture, the same culture around the world, and we've lost a lot. And so one thing I'd like to see in the world of the future is people design their own things. So here's a problem with the way I teach design. I say we should send in the anthropologists, the design researchers to go and study the people we're designing for and discover what their needs are. And then we come back to our company and we do ideation and we do prototypes and testing. And then we go back and say to the people, here's your solution. Here's the solution to the problem you didn't know you had. Why are we dictating? What I would recommend, and we're going to try to see how we can manage this, is we go into the community, and every community has really creative people. And find the creative people who have had difficulties in some component of their life, and they've invented some workaround. They've invented some solution to a problem that faces them, whether it's a problem in cooking or whether it's a problem in sanitation and food delivery. It doesn't matter. You will find someone who's been working on that. And now we come in not as dictators saying, here's your answer, but as facilitators and advisors, mentors, and building on what they've done. And what this guarantees is that what you're doing is really of value to the people in the community. And it'll also mean that there's a wide variety of solutions across the world. But one thing that's happening in today, and it'll be even more relevant in the future, we don't have to do mass production. We don't have to make a million things that all look the same, because we have new methods of manufacture, 3D printing and what's called additive manufacturing, that allows it very, very simple. And every single thing coming off the assembly line could be different. And the same with digital technology, that's even easier to do. And if we made digital technology more modular, so that, say, the stuff underneath the infrastructure might be the same for everybody, like the operating system of a computer or a cell phone is the same for almost everybody, but the applications are different. And so why can't our lives be just as variable as all the applications that we have on our phone, which do things in different ways, and we choose which ones fit our style? We don't have enough of that. So that's what I'm looking for in the future.
Awesome. Thank you. I love the idea of decolonizing design. Thanks so much, Don. I'm really looking forward to seeing what's going to come out of your research.
So am I. Yes.
Thank you. So we've got some more questions, and Linda's question has been on top for a while, but she's unable to join you on screen. So she's asked me to read it to you. The question is, hi Don, what do you believe will be our biggest challenge in experience design in the next 5 years?
Well, in some sense, I've answered components of that. One of them, so two of them are what I've talked about already, which is I think I want the design team to be able to say what it is that should be built in the first place. That will be a major change in experience design when you have some control over what it is you're doing. And the second is the decolonization, that is allowing the different cultures in different parts of the world to have things that better fit the way they live. And there are other things happening. So first of all, as I said, there are new manufacturing techniques, and some of them are very difficult for normal people to use. So the additive manufacturing, 3D printing, is not easy to design for, because in order to take full advantage of it, well, what you want is you want something that has great strength and is lightweight and is inexpensive. But what that really means is when you make it, you have holes inside, because there's lots of material that makes it heavy and is expensive that doesn't do anything for the strength. But it's very difficult for us to imagine that, and computer programs do that much better. So there are now artificial intelligence programs that change the way we design, that say, you say what it is you're interested in. You say the goals and you say the constraints, and it produces the results. And the designer no longer draws everything. What the designer says, looks at the results coming out of the program and says, that's a good direction. Do more like that. Or that's no good. Don't do as many like that. And you're using your design and experience and knowledge to make selection. You're guiding your assistant, which turns out to be a computer, to get better and better or stop being worse and worse. And in fact, if you never find anything you like, then you have to step back and say, well, maybe I didn't describe the problem better. Let me try reframing the goal and what the constraints are. Now, this is already being used. It's being used by the aircraft industry. The company Autodesk makes software that does this. One of my colleagues at UC, University of California, San Diego, just did a study of logo design where he asked designers to design logos for companies and asked computer programs to design logos with the same requirements as given to designers. So the brief to the designers, the same brief was given to the computer program, and compare the two. And the logos done by the designers were judged to be slightly better than those by the computers, but not much. And we now feel that in 5 or 10 years, the ones done by computers will be better. Does that mean that designers will lose their jobs? No, it means that designers will be better. Let me tell you about radiology. Radiologists sit and they look at screens all day, and all they do is they look at X-rays and MRIs and CT scans, and they're trying to find abnormalities, tumors, difficulties in the body, and they're very good at this. But today's computer programs can do it better than the average, and some of them soon will be better than even the best. And so I asked one of my friends, Alex Norbash. He is the head of radiology at the University of California's hospital system, and he's one of the world's best radiologists. And I said, what's going to happen when you no longer are needed to read these devices? And he said, I will love it, because then I'm tired of sitting in a room and looking at computer screens all day and making analyses. I never get to see the patients. And what I really want to do is spend my time with the patients and make them better and interpret the results that the computer has given me, the tumor analysis, and say what should be done. I could go back to being a doctor again. And I say that to designers. It will change the way we design, but I think it will make us use our skills even better. It means that how well we can draw something is no longer the most important. Something else can draw that, but my job is to figure out what the real problem is and what is a decent solution. It will change design for the better.
Thank you. Thank you, Ron. So the next question is from Lizette. I think she's minimized. Actually, where is she? I invited her to screen, but I don't see her. Maybe yeah, that's weird. Let me invite the next person in the meantime, and I'll get Lizette back. Oh, there she is.
Oh, I'm here. Hi. Hi, Dr. Norman. Thank you so much for joining. So my question was, what upcoming technology do you think has the most exciting opportunities for UX design? Things like machine learning, gesture control, brain interfaces, smart objects, that kind of thing.
Well, in part, I just answered that by talking about some of the new artificial intelligence tools. It's not clear that there's going to be any major technological shifts. One thing you need to know about technology is that it takes 10 or 20 years before technology is actually introduced into the world in a way that can be used. So if you want to know what technology will be around 10 or 20 years from now, go look in the advanced research laboratories, whether it's in a university or in, well, companies, it's harder to do because they keep that secret. But, well, for example, in my morning newspaper that I read this morning, which is the New York Times, they announced a set of new augmented journalism. And what they're doing is cell phone apps. And you can bring this, you take the cell phone and you just point it at things, and it will tell you the news relevant to what you're just pointing. So if you go outside and just point, it will tell you the pollution index. And it will tell you things relevant to your day. And they're also trying to, it's augmented reality, because virtual reality means you're embedded in a new world. Augmented means I'm in the real world, but I have information around that tells me what it's about. And when I want a restaurant, I look at the restaurant and I see the reviews and tell me what people liked about the restaurant or didn't like. Those technologies have been existing for a while, and there already are devices that try to use them, but they're not very good yet. But at some point, they're going to become very natural. So I think that whether we control by gestures or voice or just by being someplace and the system anticipates what question we might ask, we'll experiment with that. None of that's going to change our lives. But what will change our lives, perhaps, is the availability of information at our fingertips. It already has, right? It used to be that when I had some question, I couldn't get it answered. I had to go to the library and do hours of research. And now when I have a question, I just type it into Google or whatever search engine I use, and there's the answer. More and more, it answers the question. It doesn't just search, but it figures out what question I have in mind and gives me the answer. The same with translation. The translation systems have gotten really good. And it is now possible to travel to a foreign country which speaks a language that you don't know, and using your cell phone, you say in your language, and it repeats it in the new language, and you can have a real-time conversation. And it's not as good as being fluent in the languages, but it's getting pretty good. And I have a feeling that will soon be a reality, because it will be good enough that it works 99% of the time. So there are things like that, but the main thing is people don't change, and people's needs, they're mainly about communication and social interaction, and that will always be the same.
Thank you very much. I really like that idea of devices becoming more intuitive and anticipating our needs. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Over to you, Justin.
Thank you, Lizette. The next question we've got from Justin. So Justin's the guy that was dancing in the beginning and the end of the video.
Okay.
So thank you so much for your time. I think you can see by the community that you're pretty much a constant source of inspiration. So just a little bit of a fun question. I want to know who or what inspires you to do what you love.
I don't have any major figure I can talk about. I have lots of people I've worked with over the years where I've learned a lot and mentored a lot. One of the early people I met was a psychologist who studied hearing. And we worked in the basement. The first teaching job I had after I got my PhD was at Harvard University. And he worked in the basement. And he did things trying to understand how the ear worked, which is very difficult because the ear is the important part of the ear inside of heavy bone structure is not easy to get into. And he said, the hardest part in science is to ask the right question. And he said, many people, students especially, like to ask really important questions. But it turns out they're so important and so big that you don't have any idea how to do anything. I want world peace. I want to solve the problem of hunger. Well, yeah, that's good. But what are you going to do it? It's not easy, is it? If we don't even know how to begin in some of these questions. But then middle level, especially beginning professors in a university, they ask the trivial questions because they have to get promoted, so they have to have papers published, and so they ask a question they know they can get an answer to, and they do get promoted. But you know what? Nobody cares about those questions. It makes no difference whatsoever. So the trick is you have to ask a question that really matters, but where you can make a difference to do something. Now, I followed that all through my life. What I do not like to ask the trivial questions. What I want to do is I look at the world and I try to imagine what are the really important issues going on. And that's where design of everyday things came from. I was in England for 6 months, and I couldn't work the water faucets, water taps, or the light switches, or the doors. And I didn't intend to write a book, but I just got so frustrated. But what I did is I said, there are, I don't know, 10, 20,000 things that I experience in my life all the time. And most of them I can actually figure out. I never have to ever seen it before. So how come I can figure those out? And how come some of these everyday things I can't figure out? Well, that was asking the right question. By the way, my mentor in psychology, one day, guess what? He got a Nobel Prize for his work. And that was what he gave in his talk, talking about how asking the right question. So that's been sort of my major inspiration, if you will.
Oh, wow. Well, bow down. Thank you so much. My palms are sweating. It's like a first date. So thank you so much.
You're quite welcome.
Thank you so much, Justin. The next question we've got is from Ashni.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to ask my question. So we actually have many title descriptions locally and globally regarding the roles that exist within the UX design team. So in your opinion, what would be the best approach to decide what your team titles should be so that your team remains relevant within the market?
Well, that's something your team or your team leader has to decide. And what you have to know is you do have to do some prediction about where the market is going. And that's what design researchers can help you do. If the team is large enough, it's really valuable if you take a couple of people and say, your job is to be trying to anticipate the future. You can't predict the future because there are lots of things that happen are by chance, or something that you think should be really important doesn't happen. Or something that you never even thought much about turns out to be important. But you can anticipate by looking at all of these and understanding what is special about them. And to answer your question, what kind of skills might be needed to make use of it? And so the kind of skills that you need in your group will depend a lot upon the industry you're in, what the competition is doing, what the requirements of the customers are, and most important of all, what they're going to be. But that's how I would do it. I would have, and if you can't afford to have a special group doing this, well, maybe you have an offsite. You spend, well, in the old days, but you can do it virtually today. You spend a couple of days, or virtually, I would take a week, a couple of hours a day for a week, to try to talk about different directions that the business is moving into, that the people's work is moving into, and what kind of things your group, might wish to provide in the future. And then finally, to answer your question, and what kind of skills will be required to do that.
Thank you. I think just on that point, I've noticed in the industry, for example, you have international titles such as Director of User Experience or Vice President, etc. And within the South African industry, if I talk about my company specifically, we have a head of UX design, and my title is Senior Usability Analyst. So it's quite different to titles that are used in the industry. So I think there's just a bit of disconnect of like, what do we decide to call ourselves, But as you say, we just need to do our research.
Well, in general, the titles usually go, if you're working for a company, usually the title structure is inherited from the company. And the most important fight, however, is that you want the design team to get the same titles and salary and influence as the engineering team. Because it's a tendency to put the designers down lower and get paid less and not have much authority. And you want them to have the authority. Because the important thing is not what your title is. The important thing is the kind of authority you have about the activities and work that your group will be doing.
Thanks so much for your insight.
Thank you, Ashley. The next question is from Francis, and I think he's minimized. Let's just get his.
Hi. Hello, Dan.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. You really are an inspiration, and your insights so far have been very valuable. And I guess the question I wanted to ask today was, if you were to write another book, what would it be called, and what would it be about? And I think also that would sort of like give me an indication of where your mind is taking you next.
I probably will write another book, and I'm thinking about titles. One of them is designed for the 21st century. The other one, though, is maybe, I think we have to completely rethink the world, the economic structure, the governmental structure. I think that we've fallen ourselves into a trap that the kind of capitalistic economic structure that is now dominating the world is not a good one. And we need to change the reward structure for companies. And companies have to be responsible for what's called externalities. So if I am a company and I need materials and I therefore buy raw materials that are made by destroying the environment, the cost of those materials ought to include the cost of repairing the environment. If I am a company manufacturing things and I have waste that I throw away, the cost of my product ought to include the cost of that waste, because it includes the cost of that waste, which is called an externality, because the waste is not fundamental to the product. If I have to pay for that waste, I will change the way I'm doing things to try to make it so I don't have waste and so I don't destroy the environment. So, and I've also talked already today about the colonization of the world by Europe, the United States, and how we've got to stop that. And so I'm trying to figure out how to put together a book that includes all of this. And there's a wonderful book by a man named Arturo Escobar called Designs, plural, Designs for the Pluriverse, arguing that the world is filled with different points of view and different people. And how can we design to accommodate them? So there's a group, his books are well known in certain circles in the design world. He's really an anthropologist, and he taught in the United States. He's now working in Colombia in South America. But I meet with him every week, every Friday, and with a group of people. It's a group of 5 people, including me, trying to discuss these issues. And I think that may be what the next book is about.
That's awesome. For what it's worth, I really like design of the 21st century. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you, Francis. So the next question is from Yasira.
Hi, Don. Super excited. So I actually have 2 questions, but because time is a problem, so a friend of mine, Ashil, wants to know how important are visual design skills in a UX role, and how close should a UI and visual designer work with the UX team?
The answer depends upon the kinds of products and the kind of company that you're in. Visual skills and drawing skills can be very important for some products, for some designs. They, I think, may become of less importance with time because, again, first of all, computer systems will be quite capable of doing visual design. And second, for some of the most important issues facing us, like sanitation, education, healthcare, transportation, travel, visual skills are not relevant. So the traditional craft skills that we learn in design school are not relevant to solving these issues. So, but the answer is it depends. For some things, we will always need the great visual designers. and some things not necessarily. But that's okay. It's like, what about programming? You asked me how important programming is. Well, it's very essential. And designers ought to understand programming, because even if you don't do the programming, you have to understand it so you can communicate with the programmers and engineers who are building things. But not everything requires programming. And so the answer is, depends upon what you're trying to accomplish.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So you see that before you jump off, yeah, I think you can ask your second question, because we're good for questions here at time.
Okay. So there's quite a lot of courses out there, like the Human Factors International one, the IDF courses here in South Africa. Like those are like the major ones. And I've noticed that you guys also have like, you know, the NN group course, but like for South Africans, it's just completely out of reach because it's like super expensive if you convert it. But what sets your one apart from like the HFI, which is like the major one here in South Africa?
So what is the question?
Like, what is the difference between the Nielsen-Norman Group UX certification compared to the Human Factors International certification?
Well,
like, does it have like any grounds? Like, do you guys teach differently? Okay, it is from you, so it's definitely going to be different. But
certifications are strange things, because they don't really, what do they certify? They certify that you've attended a class. They don't say anything at all what you've learned, and they don't say much about what the class contained either. So certifications are strange, and I told you we have this big, massive project to understand design education, and one of the topics that we are going to address is the role of certification, because in my opinion, the courses that the Nielsen-Norman Group does, that the Human Factors International Group does, that for that matter, the stuff that the foundation I'm involved with, the Interaction Design Foundation, they're all useful. And it's really good to educate yourself and expand your skills. But the certificates you get as a result, what they do is they sort of announce to the world that at least I tried to learn this field, but they don't say anything at all about how good it is. It's not the same as a university degree where we have international agencies, it's called accreditation agencies, that state that the university actually accomplishes what it says it will accomplish. And so it has a more serious certificate, if you will, of accomplishment. But even that, even having a university degree in something doesn't mean you're really good at what.
The practical is like what sets you apart.
Actually, in the university, when you have a degree, it almost always is not very practical. You have a lot of knowledge, but you come to work to do something, it'll take you a few years to figure out how to apply it.
It's definitely different. I did notice that when I was doing like the various courses, when I was trying to transition from sales into UX, and it's all theory based. And then once you get into the industry, it's just like, it blows your mind, because the book is teaching you this, but how it's actually done is like two different things. So yeah, it's been a journey, but I love it.
Well, I'll tell you that I wrote The Psychology of Everyday Things. That's what we called the book at first. And then we changed the name to Design of Everyday Things. But I wrote that in 1988. And I wrote the new edition in 2013. And when I wrote it, I was an academic. I was working in universities. And when I rewrote it, I had been an industry executive. And so I changed a lot of what we talked about, because there's a big difference between the theory and the practice.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much. Like, this has been an amazing experience, actually having a conversation with you. And if we didn't have more questions, I would have probably stolen all of your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sira. The next question is from Fayyad.
How do I switch this off?
Yeah, well, they'll do it for you. Hi.
Hi, Don. Iggy, are you sure this is recording?
Go for it.
So, Don, my question is a bit different and it comes from a different angle. It's basically, I assume obviously that this doesn't happen often, but can you give us an example or a case study of a time when one of your designs have failed and how you went about learning from that?
Well, there's lots of failures, but I'll give you my favorite failure. I was at Apple, and I thought that the way that we're developing our computers at that point wasn't taking into account the way people really worked. And I said, I have a new idea for the way the whole operating system should be developed. And so I was a vice president at that time, but that wasn't good enough. I had to convince the executive vice president, who I reported to, that we should do this project because it was going to take a while and use a lot of people and be expensive. And we assembled a team, including some really brilliant designers. And so the people were really good. And we spent quite a bit of time, I think 6 months, coming up with what we call it is activity-based computing, ABC, in which we looked at activities and how we could support it. And one of the important points we made was that, you know, the computers are very fine if you sit down and do one thing. But first of all, usually the important things you can't just do in one sitting, but it might take you a week. And so you have to turn it off and come back. And how do you come back to exactly the same place you left off? Or for that matter, somebody might come in and ask you a question, or some important thing might happen. Or maybe you just get tired and you want to do something else, and then come back. And it's really hard to go back and forth and remember exactly where you were. So we said, let's look at the real activities people do and design it completely differently to make it easy to do. And I think we came out with brilliant answers. However, the failure was we didn't recognize how important it was, how difficult it would be to suddenly give to the world a whole new way of doing things, even if it was better. And so when I tried to then actually say, look, what we have, and we demonstrated it and we explained, and everybody said, oh yeah, that's interesting. But they all said, there's no way we would do it, because it's just too big a jump from where we are today to what you're trying to do. It's complete change in everything. Now, I think today the correct answer to have done that would have been to say, yeah, you can't do that. But I'll tell you what, let's start a new company. Now, it could be an Apple company. It could be a new division of Apple that would do this, because by doing something completely new, it wouldn't disappoint existing customers. People who wanted to try that could do it, but it could also be fairly small, so it doesn't have to be a big billion-dollar enterprise like Apple was at that point. It could be a smaller event, and so that's why, you know, a lot of the innovations don't come from big companies. They come from small startups, because a small startup could do something completely different. And it's really strange. How come the people working with the big companies can't come up with the ideas of the small startups? Well, they can, but they're often not allowed to. So it's often those startups are often called by people who quit the big company, and the very same people now do something that they wanted to do in the big company, but they couldn't, but the small company they can. But what this is talking about is you have to look at the environment in which you're doing your work. And big environments, big successful companies, whatever the name, it doesn't matter. They're like a big ship, big and heavy and clumsy. And I don't know if you realize this, but big ships, like the big cruise ships, if they want to stop, it can take them 10 kilometers before they actually can stop it. To turn is really difficult. So in theory, sailboats have precedence over motor-powered boats, not when it's a big one. When it's really big, I don't care what the law says, the big one can't respond. And so the lesson I've learned is to be agile and nimble requires a small startup, but there's no reason that a company couldn't have small startups inside of it. So I don't know if that's the lesson you wanted to hear, but that's the lesson I chose.
I think that's a lesson that any one of us can learn from. So thank you for that, Don. I'm definitely framing this.
Thank you so much, Don. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Iggy.
The next question is from Arthur.
Hi.
Hi, Don. Hi, everybody else. So my question is really at the moment we find ourselves in a time where more and more people, or I think most people in human history, really have developed this ability to now start thinking for themselves. And we have a sometimes conscious and sometimes unconscious effect on people through our designs. So how do we speed up? How would you imagine or conceptualize speeding up this process of getting more people to become better at thinking for themselves so that we can create something more sustainable in our designs, in our approach to the environment and so on?
Well, that's a society problem, and societal problems and cultural problems are the most difficult ones of all to solve. It's very difficult to change the culture of a group, of a company, of a country. The major one is education. The major answer is education, except the traditional way that we educate actually doesn't encourage people to think by themselves. A teacher goes and lectures. Lecture, by the way, is the world's worst way to learn. Lecture is good at motivating, or discussion like we're having now is a good way because you can ask questions and I can give relatively short answers, but you can even question my answer. But the way we normally teach, no, the teacher lectures, you read the books, and then there's an exam, and your job is to repeat back to the teacher what the teacher has said, which doesn't teach you to think by yourself. And so I think we need to change the educational system. We want to make it more problem-based, more activity-based. So instead of lecturing, we are given problems to solve. And usually when you're hearing a lecture, you're learning a new topic, you have no idea why that's important or why you should care. But if you're given a really exciting problem to solve and you get to work on it and you get stuck, then that same lecture can make sense. So I love to give people problems to solve in the first day of the class. And then they come back with their solutions or where they got stuck or where they didn't know what they were doing. And then you give them small little nuggets of information that they now see how relevant it is to what they're trying to do. It's a different way of teaching, but it also causes people to think by themselves because they might go off in some weird direction. And weird directions can sometimes doesn't go off and doesn't go anywhere. But sometimes that's how you actually make innovation. And the good teacher will say, that's really interesting. Have you thought about this? Or here's something you want to read that I think you'll find very relevant to what you're trying to do. So in other words, we need our educational system stops people from thinking for themselves, and we need to change that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Arthur.
I don't think I'm sure there's other people that need questions answered. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
The next question we have is from Kate.
Hi, Don.
Hello.
I am excited as everybody else on this call to be talking to you. I actually want to try and rephrase my question that I put in the chat thing. I am not sure what kind of an answer I would be expecting, but it's just something that I've been exploring recently is different kinds of design and the way that they can work together to kind of create that kind of better change that we keep talking about. So for example, one of the things I've been exploring is multisensory design, which would cater for like especially people with like neurodivergent minds, people with autism or ADHD, and how all of our senses kind of are a lot more important than we kind of give credit for, I guess. The sound on the floor, the colors on the walls, everything. But we're talking about education and design and all these different roles, and how do we kind of I don't know, it just feels like everything becomes more complicated rather than more together in a way. So sorry, a question more like what are your thoughts on this?
Actually, that's a really good question, because usually the kind of design that we are talking about today and that most of you in the audience do is of a single thing. You're doing maybe a digital design that's going to be used on a screen of some sort of computer like I have. I'm surrounded by two huge screens, one there, one here. In fact, if I look down to see the question, it looks to you like I'm looking away from you. In fact, if I look right at you, it doesn't look like I'm looking at you. I have to look at the camera. It's crazy. But what you're talking about is the way it ought to be. How does it fit into our lives? And the people who do this best are people in theater, because they are multisensory, if you will. Now, you're still sitting in the audience in a fixed place, and there's stuff on the stage in front of you, but you hear sounds from all around you, and good set designers are making use of the entire space. So it's theater, but it's also the theme parks. I spent a fair amount of time with the people at Disney in California, going through their theme parks, and they worry about the entire experience. They worry about the sounds, the smells. They worry about the lines and how you can keep people to enjoy the lines. They worry about the physical presence and all the stuff you're seeing in the space, everything you're talking about. And they also have to accommodate a wide variety of people. Some people who have trouble walking or standing, and some people who can't see very well, or can't hear very well, or are autistic, or have attentional disorders of all sorts. And they do a wonderful job. And they even disguise the lines. So one of the things when you go to a theme park, quite often you're going to see and experience this wonderful ride or event, but there's a big crowd. So, but first of all, you go into a big room where somebody gives you the backstory and gets you involved with the history of the make-believe event you're about to experience. That actually is a way of disguising the line. You think it's part of the event, but what they've done is they've said, we have all those 100 people waiting, so instead of just having them stand in a line doing nothing, we'll bring them into a big room and we'll tell them the story, and they'll think it's part of the event, but actually it's the line. But thinking big, thinking like this, I don't think it makes it more complicated. I think it says, let's think about the whole experience and make it cohesive. Let's make a single story that brings together the entire aspect of the experience, which is, as you said, the wide variety of people and all of the senses. And but by having it a single cohesive story can actually make it in many ways simpler, not more complex.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that's made me think about this recently is I just read the book Joyful by Ingrid Fettel-Lee, who has that idea of which is, every chapter is about different kinds of joy, different places we find joy in our lives, and the importance of that, the concept of joy. And I think she actually talks about Disney at some point, and kind of the kind of joy that it actually sparks for adults too, and kind of the way that we
yeah, it's for all of us,
these things. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you, Kate. The next question we have is from Storm.
Hi. Hi, Don.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you so much for taking my question. I'm a you are a very big inspiration to me. So the question I have is, many people dispute the relationship between user experience and user interface design. What, in your opinion, do you think it should be? Do you think it should be considered one or two separate roles?
Between user experience and
user interface design, so UX and UI.
If I can maybe also add to that, if possible, because
okay.
I think so. There's also the trend of UI and UX has kind of been amalgamated and merged into the role of the product designer. You know, over the last year or two. Yeah. Just to add to Storm's question, if I may.
Well, part of it is that the meaning of those words has sort of been modified over time. And since I started off, if you will, being the UI part and then inventing the UX term and moving on even to bigger experiences, I think that the difference is this. What really matters is the activity you're trying to accomplish. And it could be one of enjoyment, or it could be one of a task you're trying to do, or whatever, which is why as I said earlier, we tried hard to make something that was called activity-based design. And what's really important about that often is the experience. You walk away feeling that you've accomplished something, that it was an enjoyable experience. Now, mind you, in doing a difficult task, you may also get really frustrated, and you may get even angry at the kind of things that are happening. That's part of the experience. And by the way, if you're the people who write plays or movies or TV shows, know that the best show has to have parts where nothing is working, where there's some problem, some challenge. So if you want people to be really happy, the best way to make someone really happy is to cause them to be really unhappy. And then resolve the problems that made you unhappy, and then you're even better off than if. So you are actually more enjoyable if the thing goes up and down, then you end up at a wonderful spot that's so much higher than the low spot you were at before. If you were at the high spot the whole time, you wouldn't think it was so enjoyable.
That makes sense.
Now, but the point is, the UI, if you will, is the plumbing. Now, you may not think of plumbing in your house, but it's essential. And so UI to me is not the exciting work. But if you don't do it well, things are really horrible. If your plumbing stopped working, or you got backup or whatever, it would be horrible. So the plumbing is nothing that people ever pay attention to. But if the infrastructure inside your house doesn't work, it's horrible. So that's UI. UX is thinking about, well, the whole point of the word X is experience, thinking about the experience you want people to have. That's the high level concept. But in order to cause that, you have to do the low level stuff, which is the UI stuff.
Mm.
So it's from my point of view, UX should be. Today, when somebody says I'm UX designer, it means they make websites, which I think is a horrible distortion of the whole notion.
Mm.
I think the notion is, and the way I invented the term, and the youth group I was in that did this, was that it's about the entire experience, about how you learn about a product, how you're able to purchase it, how you open the box, how you set it up. When something goes wrong, how you figure out what to do about it. And how do you upgrade it? All these are part of the experience. But again, to make each of those work requires careful work at the UI level, at the interaction design level.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thank you, Storm. The next question we have is from Nathan. So just before you start, Nathan, I just wanted to say we're at 6:20. So we have about 25 minutes because we're ending at about 1:45. So if there are any, we'll try to go through the amount of questions, but we will do a hard stop at 1:45, guys. Over to you, Nathan.
Great, Don. Thank you very much. I think I'm in the minority here. I had my first time I heard of you was actually before this conference. I think it just shows the different worlds. I'm not actually a UX designer. I'm a behavioral economist technically, but it's just funny the different books that people read and how that inspires people. But it's exciting because I get to read an extra book. My question is around whether you have a view on if design should be its own specialization. So, or should design be a task for everyone, including engineers, data analysts? It often seems like the roles are siloed, and there's, I'm sure you know the artist Olafur Eliasson, but he uses elements of engineering, psychology, in his art and in his design to tell a story. I at least personally find that inspiring from like how we think about design and it not being this box, or how engineering is not necessarily a box. What's your view on that?
I think design is a way of thinking. It's a way of solving, a way of problem finding, that many different fields solve problems. But they seldom step back and say, is this the right problem? And what a designer is trying to do is find the right problem. So I think it can be applied to every field. So let me talk about economics. The field of economics is really bizarre and weird because it has become a field of mathematics. And so what has happened is the economists make up very logical sounding axioms from which they then derive. And they never actually bother to check whether that's how people behave. And so you have all sorts of axioms about the stock market and how it should behave, and that it's a logical system and it will find its optimum. And then you have these horrible crashes or booms or whatever, and it's crazy, and it violates the theory. So I had 3 friends in economics. Let me tell you the first one, whose field was everything. He did psychology, he did computer science, he is one of the inventors of the word artificial intelligence, and did one of the first artificial intelligence programs, etc. And he also worked in management theory. And I remember I was in San Diego driving my car, and I heard on the radio that the Nobel Prize in economics has just been awarded to my friend. And so I go to the university and I find my economic friends and I say, look, Herb Simon just won the Nobel Prize.
Wow.
And you know what they said? What a waste of the Nobel Prize.
Wow.
He was the first behavioral economist. And then I was at Northwestern University in Chicago, and one day somebody came into my office and he said, I'm a professor at University of Chicago, and I'm an economist, but I'm actually doing design. And so I want to talk to you about design, because I read the design of everyday things, and I think it's really what I'm doing. And so we talked for a while, and I said, I don't understand, but eventually he convinced me that he was a designer. And he was writing a book, and the book was called Nudge, N-U-D-G-E, and it's a brilliant book. And his name was Rich Thaler, and he got a Nobel Prize for what he was doing. And the third group is there's 2 friends of mine I've known since they were graduate students, and when I was just at my very first job. One's name was Amos Tversky, the other was Danny Kahneman.
Wow.
And they just recently got the Nobel Prize. Now, unfortunately, Amos made a mistake. He died. And if you die, you can't get the prize. So only Danny got the prize. But they were psychologists.
Yeah.
Simon did everything, anything you could imagine. And Kahneman and Tversky were psychologists. And Thaler, he was the only economist. But he wrote another book about his autobiography and how when he joined the Department of Economics at Chicago. First of all, he was surprised they hired him, because what he was arguing for was everything what they were against. But design is a way of thinking, and it can be applied to every field. And I think behavioral economics is a really good example of how other ways of thinking can advance the field in ways that it has now become an accepted and very important part of economics. But it was hard to get it accepted because it violated. Hey, you actually looked at real people, and you discovered that if I have two items that are exactly the same and one costs more money than the other, which would you buy? You'd buy the cheap one, right? That's an axiom. Well, in the world of business, no. There have been lots of brands that felt that their sales were too low, and what they did is they raised the price very high, and their sales went up. Now, the economists can't explain that, but the psychologists can, and the designers can. Well, gee, if the price is higher, it must be better.
Completely. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Nathan.
I aspire to have as many Nobel Prize winning friends as well.
Well, but I know about 10 Nobel Prize winners. And let me tell you, they're just people. Just ordinary people. They do sometimes just the same sort of stupid things that you do, I do.
Completely. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So the next question we have is from Haneli.
Hello.
Hi, Don. It's such an honor to speak to you. You've been such an inspiration to me. I've actually completely changed my careers since I've been following you. So I want to ask, so I've studied information technology. It was one of the first courses available here. And I've done so much, like you talked, certifications, but the certifications are just the same thing over and over. Is there anything like you talked about education, anything else like a degree or a certain thing that you would recommend that I can do or that we can do to improve ourselves at UXs, as design, or anything, any other field that would help us? Because there's not much in South Africa. We don't have degrees. We have, like Yasira said, we have HFI, and that is about it.
Well, that's a really difficult question. I know it's an important question, but I like to say that all the most important questions are really difficult, because actually, if it wasn't difficult, they wouldn't be questions anymore.
Yeah.
Well, there are two comments I usually make about this. The first is, when you go to get an education, to take a course or whatever, the critical thing is not the university or the department. The critical thing is the person. So especially in graduate school, when students say, I want to go and get a PhD degree, that's not necessary in design, but it's a relevant story. They want to know what university they should go to, and I say that's not the way to choose. What you want to do is you want to find somebody who's relatively young, who's doing the kind of work that's exciting to you. And they say, well, how do I find that person? Well, because that person usually is publishing. So you have to go and look at the conferences that talk about the stuff you care about, or look at the journals or the places where papers are published. And like, I publish a lot of my things in LinkedIn or in Fast Company, not in technical journals. And you have to go look at them, and you find somebody who really excites you, who's at a university, then make friends with them. How do you do that? Well, you just write them and ask them an intelligent question. Okay. People enjoy being asked good questions. I spend a lot of time answering questions from students all over the world, because sometimes they're really exciting. And I learn things from the questions. But the point is, you want to find the person, and then you say, can I come to school and work with you? And that's where you find somebody who might match what you care about. Okay. Doesn't matter where they are. And the second thing is, if you don't find somebody like that, well, figure out what it is you really care about and learn more about that, even if it has nothing to do with design. Because my experience is if you find things you care about, first of all, you'll be good at it. If you don't care about it, you're not going to be good at it.
No.
Something you enjoy, and you'd be surprised. Design is such a rich field. It works in so many different areas and requires so many different skills that even this obscure skill that you have because you just enjoy it, I just love to knit and I learned how to knit, it will turn out you can use it in design and it makes you a better and more enjoyable designer.
Okay. Thank you so much. And thank you very much for giving us your time. Really appreciate it.
Hanley, thank you so much. So one more question, well, the next question, and I think it probably is the last one of 2 or 3 before we close. And let me just get Dion on the screen. Just waiting for, I don't know if Dion want to share his video, but Dion, over to you.
Hi, Dr. Norman. Thank you so much for for your presence and having this opportunity to speak to you. 2 of the takeaways for me today is of what you said is the hardest part in science is asking the right questions. And yeah, these are the 2 things that I will probably treasure for the next part of my life. And then the second one that you said was you can't predict the future, but you can anticipate the future. Yeah, just to say to you that I will, well, yeah, it just blows my mind. It's so simple and yet so powerful. So the question that I want to ask is, what are your thoughts about the notion of starting out with an assumption about your users or your audience, and then creating an experiment to validate that, and then getting the learning, that informs the design, and then ultimately the customer experience. So it's almost like an upside down approach. I was just interested to find out do you have any thoughts on that? Or yeah.
Yes, but first of all, I don't want you to have an idea and then do an experiment to validate the idea. You then do an experiment. If you think, I'm going to do an experiment to validate the idea, that's a bad start. Then you do an experiment to find out what really happens and to learn from it. Because it may validate, it may contradict, or more likely, some parts of your idea will be right and some parts will be wrong. And so you think of the experiment as learning. But let me get to your second part. I've already commented about the way I teach design and why it's wrong, in which I said we shouldn't be dictating to others what they should do, and going and doing the design research and then using that to develop possible ideas for solutions and then developing the prototypes and tests. That's the logical way of doing it, and it's not always the best. So there's another way of, so first of all, I think there are 4 fundamentals to my process of design. One of them is to understand the problem, so you're solving the real problem. Second is to focus on the people. Third, to recognize that everything is a complex system, and solving one little piece often can make it worse. You have to look at the entire system that's involved. And last, because we're dealing with people in society, we don't know enough to get it right the first time. So that's why we do prototypes and tests, so that we can learn and modify. In fact, if you devise something, a new product, and it's successful, guess what? People will use it to do things you never dreamed of, and therefore now the product isn't the right design, but because of a good reason, because you did such a great job that they use it in ways you never thought of, and now you have to modify it to help them do what they're trying to do. But those are the 4 important things. But in what order do people do them? You can do them in any order you like. In fact, there's one whole philosophy of design. It's called research by design. That is, the first thing I will do is build a solution. I'll build something. So I start off by, here it is, and I put it out in the world. But I know it's probably not right. But by building something and giving it to people and seeing how they work with it and what they do, what they can do, and I will learn so much.
Yes.
So the important thing is when I build it right away, I know it's going to be wrong, and therefore I don't have any problem throwing it away. But by building something, I'm going to learn a tremendous amount.
Brilliant.
In fact, you know how this is a fairly common thing. Lots of people do it now. But one of the things that occurred to me, I realized I was teaching how to do it in this order, but I also realized that many times I just jump to a solution and try it. And I'm saying, well, that's interesting. And I've talked to many designers, and a lot of designers are already sketching solutions when they're first hearing about what the issue is. But they know these aren't right. But it allows you to do tests, just like you understand. When I put it out in the world, I learned so much more than I would have done. In fact, I didn't know what questions I should be asking. But when I give somebody something, suddenly I realize all the questions that I should.
That's a fantastic path to get to the right questions, I suppose. Thank you so much, Dr. Norman. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dion. I think we've got maybe time for one more question, and let's choose maybe a fun question. So a question from Nicola. She says she doesn't want to come on screen. The question is, Don, a more light-hearted question. Do you have any Norman doors in your home or office? And why are these still a thing? And what's the everyday thing you use that annoys you the most?
Well, we work hard in our home to have to minimize things. We changed our doorknobs. We put in new switches, and I use 1 minute. One of my most important design tools is this. Sticky dots with different colors. And I have them all over. I have some red, green, and blue dots here on my keyboard. So I can remember, I hate it when I'm reading something and I want to scroll up and down a page. And I can't find it. I have to look carefully to find the page up and page down buttons. So page up is a red dot, and page down is a green dot. And the same with, I'm using an adjustable stand. So see, I push this button, the computer stands up. When I stand up, see, I'm at just the right height for the computer picture. But it turns out it's the wrong height to type because my hands are at the wrong angle. And so what I do is I have 4 buttons. One of them is the height to do video conferences where the camera is aimed almost properly. The second is slightly higher so that my hands are typing, so I don't have to bend my hand like that. I can hold it straight, which is better for the hand. And then I have 2 other buttons. One is for when I'm seated. If I push this button, which is labeled green, and I have a green dot on the keyboard to remind me that green means typing. Now my hands are properly designed for typing, but the problem is the camera is too high. So if I look at the camera, I'm looking way up. If I look at the screen, it doesn't look like I'm looking up at you. So I push the red button. So, but again, the buttons help me, and we have them on all our locks, so we know which way to turn the key. This lock requires you to turn the key to the right. This one requires to the left. So we put in dots. And but I have a coffee maker. We have a coffee maker that's built into our kitchen. And so we come in the morning and I push the button underneath and it turns it on. and about a minute later it's ready to go, and then you decide what kind of coffee you want and how much, espresso, a mug, very strong or weak, and you set it up and you push the button, you get 1 cup. And I've been discovering that it's really bizarre. I go in the morning and I set it up, and then I go away while it's turning itself on and heating the water, and then I come back and I push the same button. I push the button that turns it on and off. And so instead of getting my coffee, I turned off the thing. And I've been trying to figure out how to solve that problem, and I have not figured it out. So I have to waste yet another minute while it turns on again and heats up the water again. But aside from that, well, I work really hard to follow my own advice.
That is, I mean, thank you for that. I think we're going to call it, but before I do, I honestly want to thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your knowledge. Thank you for your inspiration. And thank you for the humor. I know that you enjoy a good joke. I know that you like making a good old joke. But yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm going to take the opportunity to thank you on behalf of all the attendees.
But also, I'd like to thank you for organizing this and thank the audience, because first of all, the questions are good. And second, even I'm looking here on the right at the chat, and there's some interesting, I'm ignoring the thing to say, oh, thank you, but I like some of the substantive comments. Yeah, thank you for this experience. I've liked it. This is what I like to do. That's why I teach in the university, because I like interacting with students or with designers and learning from it.
Don, I mean, we welcome the opportunity to interact with you. And I know that you are a busy man, and even though you said that you're going for your 5th retirement, and hopefully that is based on the hopes that you have, the last, and that you can continue what you intend to continue. If at any point there is an opportunity to interact with you again, we gladly grab it. But honestly, thank you so much for your time. I know that you have another
retirement, by the way. What retirement does, it allows you to do the stuff you really want to do, because I have one rule on this 5th retirement. I will no longer be in charge of anything. Well, I am in charge of this big effort to redo design education, because when you're in charge, there's always an emergency. And if you deal with the emergencies that happen every day, you will never do what's most important, because the important things take years. And so it's a temptation to say, oh, this is a really urgent emergency. If I don't take care of it, I don't know, the world will collapse. And my thing will it'll take 2 years to write a book. And so if I delay it by 1 day, it doesn't matter much. No, because the next day there'll be another emergency and another one and another one. So you have to learn not to do the emergencies. Put them off, but spend a dedicated amount of time every day to thinking and doing what's really important, the hard things that may take longer in life, and then deal with the emergencies. And so by retiring, I'll get rid of a lot of emergencies, and I'll be able to focus on doing what I think is really most important in life, which is addressing the major societal issues we have, but changing design education so that design can address these major issues. So thank you for setting this up. I enjoyed the interaction. And one of these days I'll get to South Africa.
I hope it's sooner than later. You've got a ton of people that would love to meet you, but also show you around. There's a ton of great food here, a ton of great people. I know that you've got another meeting coming up in the next few minutes, so I'm not going to keep you up any further. Thank you again. Thank you for the time, and good luck with the coffee machine.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Have an awesome day. Bye.